Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today I have a slightly different video for you, which is a series that I've been wanting to get started for quite a while. The concept is something I'm sure we are all familiar with by now, being to just take an artist's entire discography and rank every album from worst to best. And so I figured for the first installment of this series, I would do just that with the Velvet Underground, who are, of course, the absolutely legendary and groundbreaking 60s and to an extent 70s rock band. Fronted, of course, by the one and only Lou Reed, and throughout their career, they have released multiple classic albums that I am excited to rank and talk about. I'm sure it will come as absolutely no surprise that Squeeze is my least favourite Velvet Underground album. It's debatable whether this one even counts, given that it's effectively just a Doug Yule solo project. However, it was still released under the name The Velvet Underground, and therefore I'm still counting it as a part of my ranking. The complete lack of involvement from every single other key member of the band is definitely felt on this album, being by far the least creative and original project in their catalogue, and really does just demonstrate how important Lou Reed and co were to the sound of the band. Not that this album is necessarily awful, but it's just one of those where it's completely overshadowed by having multiple legendary classics behind it. And like I said, it just completely lacks the creativity of many of their previous works, and ultimately just comes across as boring and unoriginal more than anything. It really is nothing more than just a very standard rock album. It has some slight influences from folk and country in there, but still is nowhere near as creative or unique as any of the albums before it. I think it's also the album in their catalogue that shows off its influences in a more obvious way than any of the others. Songs like Caroline are very Beach Boys inspired, and it's definitely very obvious how much the Rolling Stones have been an influence on tracks like Little Jack. And of course, not that being influenced by bands like the aforementioned two is in any way a bad thing. Both the Beach Boys and the Rolling Stones are bands that I love and have had so much incredible influence, but it's just more that the Velvet Underground are a band in a similar league to that in terms of the influence that they have had on other bands over the years too. So when they are the ones showing off their influence in a more obvious way, it definitely makes their sound feel a lot less original, given that again the Velvet Underground are innovators and pioneers of various different styles and sounds. So when they're just borrowing ideas from other bands, as great as it might sound, comparatively it does make this album a lot worse. But of course, not that this album is all bad, there are still a handful of tracks in there that I do still quite enjoy. Both of the tracks I've already mentioned are ones that I do actually quite like, as well as others including Me and Old Man and Louise, being easily still some of the best written and performed tracks on the album. But for the project as a whole, I find it easily to be their least cohesive, consistent, and original album. And for that reason, I rate this album a 5 out of 10. White Light, White Heat is an album I've always thought is just a little bit overrated. It's undeniable how influential this album was, though, of course, taking such an interesting approach to psychedelic rock at the time, as well as being a huge album for laying the groundworks for genres like punk and noise rock. However, I see this album as just that, influential, but not so much necessarily an actual great album to listen to. A lot of it, I think, is very comparable to other very standard B-list 60s music. Think along the lines of bands like The Kinks. Again, not that that's at all a bad thing, there are still lots of incredible music to be discovered there. I just find that this album does pale in comparison just a little bit to the many other great albums in the Velvet Underground's discography, as well as many other bands on the scene at the time. However, there are still quite a few tracks on this album that on the whole do manage to make it quite an enjoyable listen. I do really like The Gift, which features some amazing spoken word vocals with some fantastic storytelling, as well as some of the most fun and experimental instrumentation on the album, as well as of course Lady Godiva's Operation, which does have some of my favourite moments on the album, most notably its much softer approach to the guitar work. And of course, I can't go without mentioning the epic closing track Sister Ray. Coming in at 17 minutes long, it takes up almost the entire side B of the record, and there is a hell of a lot going on this track. The guitar sounds are just brilliant and unique, even by today's standards, and I also just love the very slow progression and evolution of the track's sound. I think it maybe could have been cut down just a little bit. I think that by about halfway through the song, they've kind of made their point, but a lot of the very witty and funny lyrics do still manage to keep it entertaining, with there obviously being countless memes about sucking on Lou Reed's ding dong, which to be fair, I think it is quite funny. And even some of the guitar work towards the end is also still quite interesting. And so that's why this album is a 7 out of 10 for me. With Loaded, I think we are finally getting somewhere, and while for the most part it is just a pretty straightforward rock album, I still think that it does an absolutely fantastic job at showcasing the band's incredible skill set, just with a very good selection of styles on show here, from everything to folk to even a bit of country. Lou Reed's charisma is on full display on many of the songs too, with some highlights including Rock and Roll having some of the most fun and witty lyrics on the project, and of course the incredible passion showcased in songs like Sweet Jane and Head Held High. I do also love many of the much calmer and folkier moments on this project too, with the band showing an incredible ability to incorporate such a complex sound into the mix, especially with such an immersive atmosphere and incredible instrumental palette. And even some of the elements of glam rock that are used as well, I think, are amazing and give it such a theatrical element. There is the odd song in there like Cool It Down or I Found a Reason that I think are just more filler than anything, but in an album that is this dynamic and versatile, it's hard to accuse them of interrupting the flow. And I think that the main thing that does hold this album back is you do have a handful of moments with quite sloppy production. And while in the past they have somewhat managed to make that style quite iconic, there really is no denying that on songs like Train Round the Bend, that guitar could have just sounded so much better, which I think is quite a shame because everything about this track, from its writing to its performance, I think is incredible. But on the whole, I think that this album is still incredibly consistent and well performed, and so for that reason, I'm rating this one an 8 out of 10. The Velvet Underground's self-titled album is truly an incredible project from start to finish. The production is absolutely incredible, with the whole album being so well mixed and put together, but still leaving just enough room for the band's signature gritty sound. The track What Goes On shows off some absolutely incredible guitar work, which is impressive not only because of how technically good it is, but also just because of the incredible atmosphere that this track manages to create despite it still sounding quite rough. I also love the moments on this project when the band lean more into their slightly folky side. Tracks like Candy Says are a great example of this, with this one in particular just being such an amazing opener to the album. Being not only just a fantastic song, but even as the album opener, still giving so much of a chance for the music to build on top of that, while still giving a very satisfying intro. Pale Blue Eyes is of course another favourite of mine from the more folky side of things, being a very simple and yet beautiful ballad, and despite it being so repetitive, it never manages to feel annoying or overbearing in any way. And then after a very calm and folk-centered side A of the record, beginning to see the light comes in with a very sudden transition into a much more guitar-based rock song, just feeling like classic Velvet Underground in every sense. From everything to the very gritty guitar sound to Lou Reed's incredibly charismatic vocal delivery. I'm Set Free has such an incredible and very unique guitar solo, and of course I can't go without mentioning the Murder Mystery being one of the most incredible songs on the whole album, creating such an intense and suspenseful atmosphere. And of course the very chaotic vocal sections and dynamic guitarists managed to keep this song's entire 9-minute runtime interesting all the way through. And while not every single song on this album makes an equal contribution, with there being just one or two in there that are a little bit forgettable, everything from the pacing to the production is still absolutely on point on this album, making it easily one of my top 2 favourite Velvet Underground albums. And I would absolutely rate this album a 9 out of 10. Velvet Underground's debut album and collaboration with Nico is, in every sense of the word, a complete masterpiece. The production, for one, is just absolutely top-notch, and while sounding quite primitive, it completely owns that sound and makes it iconic, and uses it in a way that suits the style of the music absolutely perfectly. I think that this is by far their best paced album, with every single song feeling like it makes a worthy contribution. Everything from the haunting and suspenseful Venus in Furs to the beautiful, simple, and iconic opener Sunday Morning. Many of the songs with Nico on vocals are also some of my absolute favourite moments, with it sounding so incredible having so much softer singing in the mix with how harsh and noisy a lot of the album can be, which again is only further proving my point about how well paced it all is. Tracks like Femme Fatale and I'll Be Your Mirror give Nico an incredible chance to show off how talented of a vocalist she truly is, while not being completely overshadowed by the rest of the band. Even some of the more witty moments like Waiting for the Man or the epic progressive closer European Sun show off a much more progressive approach to their sound, again with quite a primitive style, but they are just somehow managing to make it so iconic. And of course, it's undeniable how influential this album would eventually become. It really does blow my mind that this project came out in 1967, considering that it plays with a lot of styles quite adjacent to genres like punk and noise rock, which are genres that wouldn't really become properly fleshed out until a decade later. This truly is just one of the most forward-thinking and influential and perfectly crafted albums I have ever listened to. And it, of course, is a 10 out of 10 from me. And so there you have have it, my personal ranking of every single Velvet Underground album from worst to best. Thank you very much for watching this video. Do of course let me know in the comments how you would rank the Velvet Underground albums, and of course be sure to leave a like if you liked the video and leave a dislike if you didn't like the video. And remember to stay hydrated.